So one of the executive orders signed by President Donald Trump since he took office was to pull the US out of the Paris Agreement on climate for a second time. He also signed an order instructing federal agencies to reject international climate finance commitments made under the previous administration. The decision comes just after 2024 was named the hottest year on record. Let's bring in David Nicholson. He's a Chief Climate Officer at Mercy Corps. Welcome, David Nicholson. So let's start. What does the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement mean for African countries?
This decision has profound implications for Africa. This is a continent that is the least responsible for the climate crisis and is already experiencing some of its most profound and serious impacts. Any step back from climate commitments among the major emitters, could set a really dangerous precedent and have a knock-on effect, leading to others to consider walking back their own commitments. This seriously undermines efforts to limit global warming, which in turn will exacerbate extreme weather events and lead to things like increased global food insecurity, water insecurity, and migration. The US is also a really significant source of climate finance for less wealthy nations. And African nations, many of whom are really leading the charge on innovative ways to adapt to this crisis, will have to seek this funding elsewhere. And I think we all saw at the end of COP29, the global community is already not meeting the demands for climate finance, and this sets us back further.
And it's harder to understand this decision because 2024 has been particularly hard for African countries.
Yes, we're already seeing the devastating impacts of climate change across the continent. We saw severe drought spells across the Horn of Africa in the last 3 years, which led to severe food insecurity and water insecurity, can lead to people migrating and causing conflict. And in other parts of the continent, and recently we're seeing devastating floods that can, and as we're seeing on your screen here, can really devastate communities and undermine efforts for people to not just cope and adapt, but thrive, which is what people want to do.
So what does the rest of the world do now?
So we're now in a position where other countries are going to have to step up and take the lead. The US has been an important leader in global climate negotiations at various points throughout the last few decades. Global US leadership has been important, and we need other countries to step up and take on that role to ensure that negotiations and agreements continue to drive climate finance to those who need it most, while also reaching agreements for rapid decarbonization. We're also going to have an increased funding gap. And, this is a place where things like private philanthropy can step up to help to fill that gap and provide the kind of catalytic financing we need to encourage private investment to come in to help us solve this climate crisis.
Thank you very much for your analysis. David Nicholson, the Chief Climate Officer at Mercy Corps. Thank you very much for your input.